And Summer, it looks like we've got you and Carrie.
Yes, I have to leave for a portion of the meeting. Carrie's got the last portion, so we're tagging it up here. And we are live, so you should be good to go.
Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. It is Thursday, June 25th. It is 12:02 p.m. And I'm sorry, I don't have the actual agenda in front of us, but we all decided to reconvene today to just dig in a little bit more with the Walnut Lane priorities. And Caitlin, we're so grateful that you and the team that we have contracted with were able to meet with all of us today. And let's just, as we get started, first determine how long we're going to be meeting today, and just make sure that we're, respectful of each other's time. And two, let's make sure that we're very clear with what we're trying to accomplish with this particular special meeting. So Caitlin, go ahead, take it away.
Sure. So I can answer those two. We will only be meeting until 1 because, as Summer said, she and Carrie are doing trainings today. And so I want to be respectful of their time. And also Joel has another meeting at 1. So we're going to make it short and sweet, 1 hour. And my goal with this meeting is to just follow up. We have the presentation ready if anyone has questions on that, but my goal is to make sure that everyone on council, especially at this meeting, we go through your questions and that we leave this meeting feeling good about the priorities set in this. As of right now, everyone except for Mike has put in priorities into this. So I'm hoping that Mike will just send those by the end of the day. And he didn't send me any other follow-up questions. So I guess I would kind of defer to you guys about whether you want to go more specifically through your comments that you included in this spreadsheet, or if you want to just open it up to discussion.
Yeah, and Caitlin, just so you know, I did send an email to the council encouraging us all to put some numbers in, with the caveat that, after today's workshop, we may choose to adjust based on some conversations and questions. But unless you wanted to do an additional presentation of items, I feel like we could go straight into Q&A with our council members, if that's okay with you.
Sure. And I would like,
sorry.
One final thing, if you guys want to see it, Courtney assembled a slide with kind of assimilating all of the sustainability stuff that they went through. And it's just a single slide that has kind of the high priority, high cost, easy and harder stuff. So Courtney, if you or I can pull that up really quickly, we can show that to the council, and maybe we can start talking about sustainability first, if that works, because I know there were a lot of questions and comments on that.
Sure.
Sure, I will share that now. Give me just a sec. Okay, so these are all the items that Dan presented on Tuesday, and just sort of lumping them into the different categories. And these ones are no-brainers. That's just, we're designing those into the project. These ones in the middle, we'd like a little more feel from you all on the importance to you. And then I think under this category, the main question we have is on the certifications and the priority level that the council sees in that line item.
Okay, thank you. I suppose we could keep this summary up while we talk. It's just, council, I can't see you if you raise your hands. So why don't we just start with Ronnie and go through each council member? Does that sound okay with everyone?
Okay, I'm just gonna say thanks for this, because this really helps me, because I, like some of the rest of you probably, liked everything on the list, but I know we can't have everything. So this really helps. It seems kind of like a no-brainer to do things with low cost and high return if we can. I'm just going to let other people weigh in if they have feelings about the high cost, high return things. And with certifications, I kind of felt like that was less important to me than if we felt like we were building something that was efficient and cost had whatever lowered costs for people over the long term. So the certifications aren't that important to me, other than obviously aiming to do as much as we can with the money that we have. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so then let's see. Let's just go to Karen next.
Okay, so I'm looking at the center list, and for me, putting native and climate adapted landscape, that's to me, that is also a low. I really feel it's high cost. So I would absolutely put that in the left-hand side column. So like all the low cost, high returns, I would, like you guys mentioned, you'll just add those into the building. So I would put in Energy Star appliances, because the goal too is to keep costs down for residents. So initially those might be a little bit more expensive, but it's so nominal, because I've been shopping for appliances myself, and I really feel like that should also be on the the left hand column. And then I'm curious about your pre-manufactured reduced material. What can you guys explain that a little more?
Yeah, so the pre-manufactured and reduced material, there's several different outfits out there that will create, based on our architectural plans, different wall systems and manufacture them within a contained site. So there's a lot of factors in the process when it comes to material use and its waste, and how they can reuse and repurpose a lot of stuff in that area. And also the off-site aspect of it, where they're not really exposed to the weather and those other elements that can slow the process down. And they can really improve the quality control, because they are in such a nice controlled environment working in these areas. And so the overall aspect of this is it's like an efficiency, but also a high return in all of those other aspects of the energy efficiency, the airtightness, the quality, and the lack of materials, or the material use.
And is there a big difference? Because to me, I find if you're efficient when it comes in place, and for construction,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to reduce labor. I mean, you're saving there.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it would, if it could be used and it doesn't, create more cost. I mean, that also seems like an easy way to go. But again, I mean, I just, doing things that really make sense, landscaping and like appliances, again, just trying to help the residents who are going to be in there, so they have low, utility costs. I mean, that I would imagine is a long-term goal for us as well. So I'll just leave that there.
One other benefit of these types of systems is, particularly with these panelized systems, we can just price this with whatever design we come up with and tweak the design accordingly if the pricing makes sense to go in this direction. So unless we wanted to go with one of these different structural systems entirely, I don't think this is a decision that we have to make right now. But if it's something we want to explore, we'll just add it to the list.
Great. Kaylin, you're up.
So in terms of certifications, I'm disinclined to incur the overhead involved in that unless it helps communicate with funders or other possible beneficiaries or benefactors what we're doing and improve scoring or somehow offset those costs. Because I mean, if we can say that we're certified and it doesn't cost anything more, that's great, but I don't think it's worth it to pay more for that. Also, in terms of communicating with contractors or suppliers, but I suspect that whatever sort of construction management there is and documentation will be adequate. As far as for electrical vehicle charging, it seems like I would like provisions for that in the future so that it doesn't require tearing up the site. But so maybe it's possible to put in conduit now to facilitate it in the future, and but don't need to actually put in the charging stations in advance of the vehicle, too far in advance of the vehicles existing. In terms of the high cost, high return, so some of these I wonder, let's see, if they're high cost and high return, so on the whole for the city or whoever the property management and ownership is in the long term, if it pencils out the same in terms of an amortized cost, then I'd be inclined to go ahead and do it. But I don't know if in terms of the capital funding for this, if that will be a bottleneck to do the high cost, high return items. But if it's not, then I'd say, let's go ahead and do as many as we can. And so in that regard, if solar PV is being done, then I would say just model the buildings and build whatever envelope and mechanicals are appropriate to hit a net zero target. And then we as the client don't need to worry so much about how you get there. I would like you to consider embodied energy as well, just because with the sort of the time frame of so the window to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change are closing, and embodied energy has become more of a factor to consider in construction than we used to even think about it 10 years ago. I think low VOC materials, I wonder if it's too costly within the renter income targets that we decide to go for. I wonder if it'd be worth doing at least a few units that are for chemically sensitive folks. And yes, that's what I've got on that list.
Can I just add one thing? Yeah, I mean, if there's any way to do it, I'm in favor of the low VOC across the board, just because I think, I mean, I don't know how long COVID's going to last, but with people spending more time indoors, it just seems more important. I was going to ask if someone could clarify for me, what in this context is mechanical ventilation?
Mechanical ventilation would be a system in place to bring in fresh air from the outside while taking the air from the inside and pushing it out. So you're constantly getting fresh air within these buildings. And that comes down to, you know, the air quality within these structures. As we start to build really tight envelopes and more energy efficient homes, we start to run into issues within the structure itself with moisture and other things that this ventilation can help prolong the life of the structure as well.
Okay, well, I know I'm not being very helpful eliminating things, but I'd like to see that too.
And that's another thing with the COVID stuff. There are some studies that show that higher mechanical ventilation can reduce the chances of airborne illnesses, not to get confused with particle droplet, which is more in the COVID realm, but other airborne diseases, it can help reduce chances of infection.
Okay, well, maybe as we go through this stuff, I know that was just one of my general questions about today's meeting was about limitations or opportunities you guys saw with COVID. So just as we're going through individual questions, if things come up related to that you think we should consider, that would help me. Thanks.
Yeah, one thing that LEED recommends too, that is something that we could try to consider in the schedule too, is on any materials that do have any kind of volatile, impacts, that they have a building flush. So like, you're not occupying it right after you paint it or right after you installed carpet that might need to flush. So having just fresh air circulate after you install those things that might be off-gassing. And also on the paint, there's a range. It's not an all or nothing thing. I think there's maybe a middle ground, and Dan and Courtney knows better than me, but that you can get lower but not totally absent of that, and that'd be probably the price effective route.
And these are two things that maybe we're able to pick one. Like if we go with mechanical ventilation, I think the having no VOC materials becomes less important because you do have more air changes. But these are also items that we can put into the budget and specifically ask contractors to include them as ad alternates, so that we have an exact price for them. And if we get to the point where we really have to cut money out of the budget, we know how much each of those are for this specific project.
That sounds great to me.
So before we move off of sustainability, I just wanted to put in 2 cents. First of all, I agree with all the council members' comments about the certification. It's great to build toward the standards, but for this particular project, like Kaylin was saying, unless we have a direct donation for doing a certification, then it's not a priority. What's so great is that this team is so versed in these different certifications, and so the fact that we have sustainability as an element of which you're soliciting feedback just shows that we're building a really cool product and a really cool thing that we're going to be very proud of in our community, that is going to afford people in our community with really safe, beautiful housing, especially of our more vulnerable population. I agree with Karen that Xeriscape can be affordable. I mean, I would almost think a Xeriscaped landscape would be cheaper than bicycle storage. And I agree too with Kaylin about the having EV ready spots, but not putting in that EV structure quite yet. In terms of solar PV, we have been looking at the extreme expense of the MRAC, the utility payments for the MRAC. And just what I have learned over the years is that we have an opportunity when we're building housing or commercial buildings, that if we are able to put forward the upfront cost of solar PV, especially since the city is going to be owning this project for years to come, it's our way to be able to control the long-term utility payments for these units. And I would be curious to see if we would charge residents only for usage above what is granted to them, so that our residents would have an energy budget that they could look to achieve, and only pay for utilities above to incentivize energy efficiency. or sorry, energy conservation. But I think PV, while it may be an additional cost to the budget, this is the time where we can control that cost of utility. And so I do think that we need to consider budgeting for solar, knowing that it's going to cost more. It's going to be more for the project. But that when we're looking at the pro forma and we're looking at the long-term cost of the project, it's really going to balance itself out because you're paying for energy either way. And so I just wanted to share that. And then that really does inform design as well, because if we're looking at a roof line that's going to maximize solar, it might look a little different than, our more traditionally pitched homes. So those are my few cents on sustainability. Before we move on, does this team have any clarifying questions for the council? Do you have any other conversation pieces on any of the additional items, or do you feel like you have the clarity from this council?
I feel like this has been some really great feedback, and thank you so much for all of these thoughts and some really awesome ideas. Dan, did you have anything else you wanted to ask the council while we have them?
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Well, one thing that we didn't talk about, and it's not on this list, but is gray water. And is there the potential for gray water in this, and the interest in the council in including that?
So Dan, when the other night, seeing it that it's 2,000 a unit. I mean, Emily, we've had this discussion at other council meetings. Where is that $2,000 coming
so
from?
that is kind of a, considering individual houses and units, that's about the cost installed with a designed basin that's been landscaped and dug. So that's like for the whole thing. It's not just for stubbing out. So that should be clarified in this, but the additional fees, for duplexes or triplexes, or if we were to do gray water in a common laundry area in the apartment buildings, that would be greatly reduced per unit. This is just like a general for a household of 1,500 square feet, 2 bathrooms, 1 laundry room. So there's potential for the gray water to be included in a lot of different ways, and not every unit would have to have gray water. I would say that when it comes to gray water, we could use gray water in specific areas on the site to water higher water use trees, shade trees on our east and west aspects of structures and buildings, or for creating a barrier where we're really trying to have shade and fruit trees and food production, and kind of incorporating all of that. So it wouldn't have to be every single unit, obviously, but I think in strategic places, getting gray water within the system for high water use areas would be really great.
Can I just say how much I love that we're having this conversation? It's just, it's very, very awesome. But what I would recommend, just with my experience with gray water systems, because the 2,000 per unit is very misleading when you talk about an apartment complex. One thing we could consider, if we're doing consolidated laundry facility, we could have 1 or 2 of the several machines available for non-gray water and labeled as such. And then the remaining machines could be labeled as gray water with a description of what that means. And then where it's coming out, signage that is saying, this tree is brought to you by your laundry. And we could even consider supplying the landscape safe detergent, which, I mean, detergent really doesn't cost that much. And that would be cheaper than, paying for the water to water landscape. So just some things to consider in that realm.
Yeah.
I don't know that plumbing the entire development for gray water is either effective or efficient.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is put things out there as examples with a lot of education, because it's still very new and it's extraordinarily new in the state of Utah. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know how other council members feel, but that would be pretty inexpensive and would be offset by the cost of water to water the landscape, and would be a really cool educational tool for our community.
So if I may, I share many of those thoughts. I'm of several minds on this. Now is the time to plumb for it. Since I'm a landlord, I wouldn't overestimate the ability of, or underestimate the ability of tenants to make mistakes. I have concerns about something where they can mess it up. So I think the idea of having if we have a shared laundry facility where we supply the detergent, that makes sense. For individual units, it seems challenging, but at the same time, it's hard to retrofit, and depending on what our future is, then in a couple of decades, we might be willing to do the city might be willing to do the education, and their culture around gray water may have changed enough that it's more common knowledge. So yeah, maybe a limited implementation or pre-plumb for it, but don't do the full shebang. And also, while I have the floor, I think this ease of use for tenants also applies to mechanical ventilation. I have rentals with ERVs, and sometimes the controls can be a little complex to help for people to understand. So just bear that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, can I throw Mike here? I'm sorry I'm late. Let me throw in my 2 bits worth on the sustainability portion of it, and I'm going to comment separately in the spreadsheets, guys. But I will say that as Kaylin just pointed out, that I'm an engineer, and I've kind of watched my whole life, whatever can go wrong will, and it reminds me of Americans or Europeans going to Africa and trying to do the right thing, helping people there build new great stuff, and all too often it's too high-techy for them. The residents there just can't handle it, and oftentimes nifty accoutrements like gray water systems don't end up staying in use because they're not taken care of. People don't know how to use them, or they break, or there's no spare parts, one thing or another. So I'm inclined as a general rule to keep it simple. Emily's point about doing it, maybe plumbing it for group facilities might work. But yeah, again, I would not be in favor of plumbing each individual house or unit. As you've showed there, your little diagram, Dan, is a little misleading in that the little tap with the manual valve really doesn't go to the sewer. It goes to a connection to the sewer because the black water goes somewhere else. But enough said. Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, that's
Right.
Which I'll just say is an acronym that is used all the time. And in case you're not familiar with the acronym, Mike is not calling anyone stupid.
Right.
Okay, this has been awesome dialogue. Any other final comments? Mike, did you want to share 2 cents about other elements? Can we go back to the summary? There we go. Mike, do you want to just comment on any other elements on this?
Sustainability you're speaking of?
Yes. I'm sorry. Are you calling in or are you video?
No, I'm live. I'm watching your
so
video presentation.
Oh, great. So we just all, the council members went through and just commented on certain points within this chart that they wanted to.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of the conference. I don't want to take your time right now. I'll just comment it on separately. I agree with much of what you guys said,
Okay.
but again, yeah, let's go on.
Okay, sounds great. So Caitlin, do you want to move on to the next, what do we call it? Realm of opportunity?
Yeah, so I think that because we have about 30 minutes left, and so the conversation I really want to get to is about the site plan. And more specifically, I don't know if we want to talk about both at once or one and then the other because they're kind of connected, but I want to make sure that we talk about parking and we talk about housing. Looking at this spreadsheet, everyone has indicated that on the site plan, housing is their top priority, which is awesome. I would say that that's our top priority as well. So I first want to get any questions about that and I want to clarify when you indicate housing as your top priority, as it's kind of described in there, does that to you mean that you would prefer housing building footprints taking up most of the site and it being lower density, or building footprints taking up most of the site and also trying to maximize density? What does housing on the site look like to you, I guess would be a first question.
Let's just kind of go through the pattern that we did before so each council member can comment on your questions that you're posing. Does that work?
Perfect.
But I forget which order it was. I think Ronnie was first, and Karen, Kaylin, and then Mike. Does that work?
I guess, yeah, clarification would help for me. Doesn't have to be now, it can be at the end, but reading Tawny's comments, she had the question about whether we perceive that parking might be possible under the units. And so that kind of affected some of my thoughts. But I mean, I think the whole idea behind this is we're trying to take Walnut Lane and improve the housing and offer more housing. So that's, I guess, my main reason for having it high. And I guess I liked, the ideas you guys had in there about offering some different types of housing. I think somewhere in there you guys asked if, we would want like just all one thing or some variety. So I did like the idea of some variety, but I don't really have much else to say.
Okay, so for me, the footprint to be maximized where we get high, I mean, more housing than less. Like, I mean, that's where I would like to see that. And then, underground parking, I mean, it feels like, shoot, that'd be great, but then we're dealing with, it seems like higher cost. If that, isn't that sort of the rule of thumb? I mean, like, so we're trying to keep costs low, but I guess we're not getting into parking yet. Is that correct? Or did you ask about parking? Was that the second part of the question?
I think I'd like to just make a site, like a physical site plan note, just from looking at how this thing lays out, and just note an observation of our team. And that is like to enter and circulate through the site, it works really well to have some type of through loop. And like we keep coming back to different U-shaped loops. And the reason is then from an emergency standpoint, then you have two entries in case one's blocked. So it's really good for fire truck, ambulance access. And then also it spreads parking out so that ideally every unit has some parking close to their unit rather than say having it all in one corner of the site. So that said, once you have that sort of looping drive, the most efficient way to provide parking with the least amount of pavement is to have head-in parking kind of off of each side. We call that like a double-loaded single bay of parking. And so that's been kind of one of our building blocks from a parking standpoint, is to have that looping drive and then maximize that and just have breaks in it for pedestrian access, safe crossings, and to just soften the look of it. So beyond that, then if we can start to look at under structures, and that's something that I think, in the coming design, it's something worth studying. It's a significant cost, like it's about $20,000 per parking space just to have the structure to get over that. It does bump up your building mass more. It may be something that fits really well with some of the smaller type units, and it may work in one of the apartment buildings, and shared kind of parking within an apartment building is more efficient than like individual garages. But that's all stuff we can kind of evaluate farther into the design. But I wanted to explain just that looping because it's something we sort of need that layout anyway, and it's the sort of baseline of the lowest cost for providing the most parking. And when we do that, we do reach the R4 numbers, so it's a really good starting point just from a physical standpoint.
Can I just clarify real quick? The parking requirements for multifamily in the R4 are currently what? Caitlin, can you answer that question?
I would defer to Courtney.
Courtney, what did
I'm going to share my screen again just because I think it might be helpful to have this visual from the presentation that answers that question.
Because I have the question on what is the parking, what is the zoning for parking for the pad and then also for the R4?
So this is the comparison right here. And so it really depends on what our mix ends up being. So depending on the number of bedrooms, the variation changes. But basically, if we're going with more apartments and townhomes and even triplexes, the R4 tends to have a smaller number of spaces.
So R4 is 1.5 per unit for multifamily, single duplexes, 2 spaces per unit. With the pad, as we all deliberated and decided, anything larger than a 1-bedroom is going to move it to the 2-space requirement, correct?
Correct.
So maybe to frame this question a little more specifically, it almost feels like what you're trying to get at from this council is, are we moving forward with a mixed unit development that includes duplexes, townhomes, apartments, or is the council more interested in focusing on the highest density of housing in this area? And so that would be apartments with a mix of 1, 2, 3 bedroom. If we stay with the R4, then it's 1.5 spot regardless of the 1.5 parking regardless of the unit size, but the pad is going to have if we go with a 2 and 3 bedroom majority, we're gonna have more parking requirements. Is that so? So the question to the council is, are we looking more at like focusing on apartments, or do we really want to have this mixed typology? Because then that informs to you all the design and the parking, right?
Exactly. Thank you for summarizing that so well, Emily.
Okay, so Mayor, my answer.
Oh, I just wanted to go back to Ronnie and just in case that was helpful, if you had any additional comments, then we'll just go through all the council.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. I wasn't totally clear that was the, and then I'm never sure where the crossover is. Like, is this a place that we're also supposed to be discussing affordability? Because obviously, I mean, affordability matters to me, in part so that we're keeping units, affordable to people who live there now. So anyway, if that plays a role, let me know now.
And
Okay.
Karen?
Okay, what's the question?
Apartments or mixed units?
Another quick note too about parking is just in other communities and ordinances, as you get into higher numbers of units, the relative number of parking spaces goes down with the assumption of just timing of when residents are there and sharing. And as you know, as you keep adding more units, you don't necessarily need the same ratio. So it's just something to consider. And I don't think that your parking code addresses that for this size. You know, that there's no sort of reduction as you go over 50 units, you know, so something to think about.
So I guess thank you for that. That's, do you guys, have you been working with the target number? I mean, is it 80? Is it 120? Like where?
The number of units that we're finding works on site is somewhere in the 80 range. And so that's where we're kind of running into an issue. As we get to the 80 units, the pad parking is difficult to fit on the site. However, with R4, we can't go more than 70 units. So we're having trouble hitting the sweet spot with either one of these zoning codes. So I think we have to make the decision of going with the pad, and we're going to get a few more units than R4, but not a whole lot because of the parking requirements. So I think with either of these, we're going to end up in the mid to high 70s. Or if we try to figure out some alternative way to move forward, or with some sort of variances, the site can handle with mixed typologies 80 to 90 units.
Okay, so I mean, if we could, and then it sounds like it's going to be our task, Emily, and you mentioned that in the sheet that we all shared, is that, I mean, this is kind of the first time we've had somebody really studying the pad, and this is where we need to know, do we need to make changes to the pad? I mean, because the whole point was to make it efficient so we could get, you know, higher density housing, and then, you know, obviously figure out the parking. So, I mean, I'm if we could get 80 to 90 units with a mixed, then I say let's have another discussion about changing parking requirements for the pad.
And can I just make a comment too, that as council, as you're commenting, it might be also helpful for the team to hear, since we're really kind of drilling down on this density that then informs parking. Like Karen, you asked the number. So 80 units is there's a wide variety within 80 units when we're talking about if they're 81 bedroom or 82 bedroom or 83 bedroom. And so I think also it's important for us as a council to let the design team know, like, what ratio of unit bedrooms we'd like to see as well. Because right now, what we have is largely single wide trailers that have one bedroom. But we know that we see several families living in a one bedroom single wide trailer. So just putting that out there for council to comment, kind of an additional density question for council. And Karen, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, I mean, I just, you know, for me, I love, you know, obviously we want to have the affordability portion of this, but there's also a real need. I mean, I think the most successful communities are mixed communities. And so, you know, I'd really like to figure out how we can achieve that, because, you know, we are in just a golden area right here, because it's right downtown and it's close to everything. So if you know, if it's a mixed community and everyone gets to ride their bike or walk to work, I mean, that would just be super fabulous. I don't just limit it to, you know, this is strictly an affordable, low income housing project. So I'm just putting that out.
The
Caitlin,
phasing comes into play too. Like, it's like, say you have quite a few units in apartments in your first phase, it'll give you some important data on how much parking is needed so that you can adjust in the future phases.
Okay, Kaylin, you want to go next?
Sure. I put 3 as everyone did for my priority on housing, because this is at least in part, below market rate housing development. And so that's the component that I want to emphasize. Beyond that, I didn't understand the parameters enough to make finer grained distinctions, but I guess in general, I would prefer a mixed typology. I think it will be more attractive and fit into the neighborhood. But ultimately, I want this to be driven by what we believe to be the market for these units. And I think that could be both informed by data as well as a judgment call. And I'm still waiting for information to help us with that. I'm looking forward to accommodating the folks that are living on the site currently. I don't know if that needs to drive our target income brackets and unit counts, or if we want to handle it like sort of look bigger picture and then accommodate those individual tenants via basically self-imposed rent control. And I feel like that's a discussion that we need to have, and we don't have time in the next 12 minutes. Courtney.
Just a real quick thought on that. I could just bring to our next conversation a bunch of information from HASU on their wait lists and the different size units that we have the longest wait lists for. And that could give us a really easy answer on the need.
That'd be great, because when I first came onto the council, there was more talk about essential housing. The city and other local government entities are major employers. And one of the challenges with the recruitment is that sometimes people will be hired and they'll move here and then they can't find housing. And so if we had units that were prioritized for them, and we understood like what the timing of their need tended to be, like especially with the school district, then maybe we could help not have people show up and then fail to find housing, and that could help out the community. And so I think what Courtney just said about like looking at the unit types, letting that be informed by data rather than me guessing what was appropriate would be good. I have a sense that offering more 1-bedrooms and studios would be appreciated by single folks and essential workers that are looking for housing, because a lot of times they end up in shared situations, which aren't many of their preferences. And so if we plan for that, then a 2-bedroom that is occupied by a traditional family maybe doesn't need as many parking stalls as a 2-bedroom that's shared by three unrelated adults. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the subject.
Okay, let's see, Mike?
Yeah, well, I share Kaylin's sentiment about so far as the 70% portion of the development for below median income folks. I think they will like studio and single bedroom things, and maybe a few 2-bedroom kinds of things. But affordability is the main issue there. Remember, guys, we promised everybody they could still be able to live there, and I don't want to have to push back when we're all done by saying, oh, you basically kicked them out and built something that they can't afford. I don't want to get there. What else was I going to say? So far as I agree with Karen, and that I would be willing to mod pad to ease the on-site parking requirements somewhat. And in order to do that, I'd like to have a better idea of what the off-street parking might look like there along Walnut Lane. One reason I ask, for example, is when I visit one of my kids in Denver. They live in a residential area, mostly single-family homes, but down the road from them are some apartments. And every time I drive by there, I'm always struck by how many cars there are parked out on the street. a lot of them. And my daughter tells me it's because of those apartments out there and they don't have enough on-site parking. And so if Walnut Lane can accommodate that, people may complain about it, but if it helps drive the down, that's a good thing. I'd be willing to consider that. It's true that the city will probably end up subsidizing this development to some extent, but I don't want it to be so expensive that it puts a huge hole in our budget and leaves us subject to that sort of criticism. I guess that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Ronnie, I just saw your hand go up. Give me just a sec. Let me make a few comments and then we can kind of keep circling around the topic. I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful for this conversation because getting data from the Housing Authority about their highest demand of units is going to be super helpful. When we zoom out and look at our community, we definitely see the majority of housing available is single family homes, some duplexes and very few apartments. Number of bedroom in apartments. I still am, a fan of a studio apartment where you don't have many walls, much like what you would see in more urban areas. So I like the idea of a mix. I've been thinking about, who's going to live here, and it's everything from the city recruiting an officer who then brings her family to live in Moab. This is housing that we could provide. People that are singles, individuals living in a single wide trailer currently on the park, and everything in between. So I really support the idea of a mixed number of units, a number of bedrooms per unit. I don't want to give away, I don't want to throw away the idea of a studio, a handful of studios, because I've lived in studios before and just loved the ease and efficiency of them. And it's also much less expensive not building walls and adding doors. So if we're going to do a single bedroom, sometimes you can do that like as a studio. That was all I was going to. Oh, and just that I did make a comment in the spreadsheet saying if we did have, if we consolidated parking into a lot, which nobody loves, but if we did that, then a lot of building literature and studies are saying, well, in 10 years, when we have moved to a society where people aren't driving their own vehicles, parking lots then become building lots. And talking about parking in between units to give separation, that's just taking up space that will probably never be a buildable space. So I just wanted to make that comment too. But back to Ronnie, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to take up much space because I realize we only hit on a few things and we're running out of time. But I just wanted to say, I have no idea if this is the time or the place, but I have always thought I would be open to running the experiment. I mean, especially with something like this, where you have the opportunity to get more units, putting in, say, 5 units that don't have associated parking, and I have no idea if that's allowed, but we have so many people who claim anyway, and I understand this is the problem. So they claim they don't drive and they don't want a parking space, but then later they acquire a car and then you have a parking problem. So I understand this is a fraught idea, but you do have a lot of people who claim that's what they want. So if you had 90 or 95 units, I'm technically open to experimenting with 5 of them, but I don't know how you would enforce or regulate if they then acquire vehicles. That was it.
I've seen that regulated where every unit gets a parking pass. And if you don't have a pass, you can't park in the development. And if you have somebody visiting you, you have to provide them with a pass. Oh, Ronnie, you're muted.
I just think of Walnut as a relatively narrow road. So I'm just, also trying to not create a nightmare where, everything's, I don't know, bumper to bumper or something, you know.
Anne did bring up a good point that this might be an opportunity with the phasing to try it out. And if we have to adjust the design of the rest of the development one way or the other, we have that flexibility.
So what else does the team need? So we've all sort of given comments on both elements. We've commented in the spreadsheet. There's certainly consensus, or not consensus, but well, there is consensus on certain items and an agreement of certain qualities. So does this team feel like this is what you needed to be able to now put some concepts together to then bring back to the council and then go into public comment?
Absolutely. I think the one other thing, you don't have to answer this now, but considering building height, are you happy with the 3 stories, or since the density and the number of housing is something you've set as a priority, are you interested in discussing higher buildings?
I think each council member should say how they feel about that before we adjourn today. So let's see, Ronnie.
I'm not comfortable with higher than 3, and I guess I did like the mention you made the other night of I can't remember if it's building envelope or whatever, but starting lower, closer to the residential, and then building the existing residential, and then building higher away from it, if that's how I understood it. That's it.
Karen.
So I did a drive-by today to see the MAPS housing, and in comparison to the residential area around it, it feels really tall. And I mean, even though I'm like looking at the left-hand side of this, picture, or even most of these, I mean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 stories, and it looks great. So, I mean, I'm open to 4, but again, not in contrast to, single story residential, the residential area around it. So, if going to if we're in R4, we get 40 feet of height. Is that correct? Is that the zone?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah.
It's currently 30
Oh, it's 30.
at current.
It's 30. So I'd say then we'd have to stay at the current height. And what you can get out of 30 feet, I don't know that 4 stories is possible unless you had some basement units. So,
yeah, Kaylin.
I share Karen's observation about MAPS, and MAPS and Cinema Court use parking to help buffer the height by moving the buildings more to the interior of the lot. So in this case, where we're talking about having the housing close to the setbacks, I have concerns about this. I'm open to the conversation, but I feel like it has to happen. We're going to have to somehow prioritize it to happen at a bigger level. Like, how are we? And I feel like this has been an issue in the city as well. Like the 30 feet in other zones is still taller than most houses, and it impacts solar access and gardens. And so I think it's an important conversation to have, but given the pace of planning conversations at the city, I'm not sure that we can get to it in time for this design. But maybe we can.
Mike? And Mike, what do you think?
I know the neighbors on the north side of this development will not be happy with their solar access. 30 feet certainly would be a maximum as far as I'm concerned, and that would be combined with whatever kind of setbacks you're talking about along the north edge. It's kind of longer than what I talked about. If you could maybe more 30 feet interior, and maybe that north edge a little, I don't know, but I guess that's the way I feel about it, because I know we're going to hear all kinds of flack, folks, from folks on that north edge. 'Cause even 40 feet is huge. I mean, that's the thing I objected to about the downtown parking structure, and 30 feet's still a big number. Emily, you may remember over on Second South, I think it was not too many years ago, somebody built a 30-foot high structure, and it grew all kind. It just stuck out like a sore thumb. So it won't be quite so bad in this development, although it's going to look worse once all the trees are pulled. Right now, it doesn't look so bad because they got taller trees, but I would pay careful attention to the setbacks and solar access to the north when you come to that 30-foot decision on the north edge.
This schematic that you guys have for density that you're showing right now looks good. I mean, it looks like you've been conscientious of where the single family neighborhoods are adjacent to this property. So
Yeah, and looking at the density drawing, it does seem like maybe the central island could accommodate taller buildings without the impacts to the neighbors. And so, I mean, maybe, I don't know if the design could also inform a discussion within the city about additional height, but with much more substantial setbacks.
I like that, Kim.
And I found too that when something is built next door to you, when windows that are when two qualities, when windows can be the smaller, wider, higher windows, so that you're not looking down into other people's property, and then also patios, like restricting patios on the any patios on the sides of the single family neighborhoods is a way. It gets complicated because then if you're stepping the development, you're inclined to think, oh, then we can have a patio, and then you're actually limiting the privacy of the single family development next door. So, okay, so that is all really informative. We're at 104 right now. So hopefully this has been helpful to the design team to get these comments. We're certainly not done meeting, but now you've got a better sense, at least in these two realms, of where the council's coming from. And then I guess the next step is your team gets to work and starts putting together some schemes and pro formas to present back to the council. Is that right, Caitlin? Can we go back to a screen? Can we stop screen sharing to conclude our meeting? Thank you so much. Is that where we are, Caitlin?
Yep. So we've been working on some site plans, and I would say that a lot of the comments that you guys have made kind of line up with a lot of the changes we've even made from the site plan we were just looking at. So I think we're on the same page, but I just really appreciate you guys taking the time, all of your comments. I mean, this was super helpful for me, and I think for our team. And so, yeah, we'll bring you some materials to review.
And if any council members have aha moments or burning questions, who on this team, do we go to you, Caitlin, and then you communicate with the team?
Yes.
So the funnel of information, the council shouldn't be directly reaching out to this team. We should be working through you to communicate with the team, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Any final comments anybody has before we motion to adjourn?
I just have a real quick one. So you guys asked us to vote on the little spreadsheet, which we did. I noticed Tawny said, oh, I didn't know if I had to make one of them 1 and 1, 2 and 1, 3. So I think she has a 3, 1, 3. I don't know how much our numbers matter there. So I was just curious what the answer was to that in case I need to adjust.
I don't know that I think that for me, the more useful thing is to see how big those pieces of the pie are. Okay. This is just going to be a useful tool for us to guide forward. And so if it looks like, right now it looks like open space and parking are about even. And so, even that is helpful. So if you wish.
Okay. I won't worry about it too much. I just didn't want you guys to think, I really think this one is the least important, is because I thought I was supposed to pick a 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it. Thanks.
They're all important, and I know this is a really hard conversation, but
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, team. What's this team's name again? Architectural Squared. So thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Architectural Squared. Thank you, Council, for meeting today. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.